Bonjour. Okay, j'ai des mots d'ouverture, puis je suis prêt pour vos questions. Before I begin, I just want to talk about the loss of Senator Murray Sinclair, the passing of a legend, in a lot of ways, someone who people looked up to across this country as a hero, and particularly for Indigenous people. He spent his whole life fighting every step of the way against the impacts of colonialism on Indigenous people. And despite all that trauma, all that pain, he never gave up hope. He had an immense hope for Indigenous people, but particularly for young people. And I hope that his work inspires a next generation of Indigenous leaders. I know everyone right now is really focused on the elections in the South. People are looking at those elections and wondering what that's going to mean for Canadians. And if you're amongst those folks that are worried and wondering, I understand why. As our biggest trading partner, the outcome of that election is going to have a direct impact on Canadians. And I know that folks are wondering who's going to win. I'm also similarly going to pay close attention. And I hope in this election, the hope of Kamala Harris's campaign, that hope wins out over hate, that the freedom for women to choose wins out over misogyny. And folks already know where I stand on Trump. I think he's a bully. I really hope that hope that Kamala has put forward shines through that day. And I think about what that would mean for so many young racialized women. I think about my daughters, for them to know that the first ever Black, the first ever South Asian president of the United States was going to be elected tomorrow, I think will be something that I can point to them and inspire them for the future. So I'm really hopeful. But whatever the outcome, for folks that are worried, I want you to know that New Democrats, and as leader, I'm focused on Canadians first, making sure we are fighting for Canadians. Whoever wins tomorrow, we need to make sure we are fighting for good jobs in Canada, making sure that we resolve some ongoing conflicts that are still leaving impacts on Canadian and Canadian jobs. So we need those to be resolved. And we need to continue to make sure that Canadians are put first, that good jobs are put first. We have seen for a number of years that Justin Trudeau hasn't resolved these issues, and that has meant ongoing impacts on Canadian workers. And we know for Pierre Poilievre, what he wants to do is put fuel on the fire of corporate greed and let multinationals rip off Canadians. He's not going to put Canadians' needs first. With that, I want you to know, for anyone that's worried out there, I will be here fighting as hard as I can to make sure we put Canada first, we put Canadian jobs first, and we put our interests first. And just before I wrap up, I want to take a moment to talk about the emissions cap that the Liberals are putting forward. This is exactly what I meant when I talked about Mr. Delay and Mr. Deny. The delay of Mr. Trudeau has resulted in the fact that now, almost at the end of 10 years, he is putting forward finally a cap on pollution. And so my message to Mr. Trudeau is, if you're serious about this, fix the loopholes in your plan and get it implemented as quickly as possible, because the delay has meant that Canadians have been let down for all these years. And we know with the Conservatives, it's Mr. Deny, whether it's whatever the previous Conservative leader or the current one, they've all denied the impact of the climate crisis on Canadians. And Poilievre is showing that at its height, because he doesn't even have a plan. His plan is to let big polluters pollute as much as possible. I'll do that again in French, and then I look forward to your questions. Donc, en commençant, je vais partager quelques mots sur la mort du sénateur Murray Sinclair. C'était quelqu'un qui est vraiment un héros dans notre pays, particulièrement pour la communauté autochtone. Son travail était comme incroyable, et il a travaillé toute sa vie contre les impacts du colonialisme, particulièrement les impacts sur, évidemment, la communauté autochtone. Malgré tous les traumas de ces discussions, il a toujours gardé l'espoir, particulièrement pour la prochaine génération. Donc, j'espère que son travail va inspirer la prochaine génération des leaders dans la communauté autochtone. Aujourd'hui, je veux toucher le grand enjeu, le grand sujet des élections dans les États-Unis. C'est quelque chose que tout le monde, je pense, est préoccupé. Littéralement, tout le monde, mais tout le monde au Canada aussi. Et c'est clair, vous savez ma position sur Donald Trump. Je pense que c'est un intimidateur, c'est quelqu'un avec des policiers tellement erratiques, imprévisibles, et j'espère que Kamala Harris va gagner. Mais pourquoi? Parce que je pense que l'inspiration de la première présidente noire et des origines asiatiques sud va inspirer plusieurs femmes Et je pense de mes filles aussi, comment ça va inspirer mes filles de savoir que vous pouvez devenir la présidente des États-Unis. Ça, c'est quelque chose d'incroyable. Mais plus que ça, j'espère que l'espoir va défaire la haine. J'espère que les droits des femmes de choisir va défaire la misogynie. Et donc, j'espère que Kamala Harris va gagner. Pour les gens qui sont préoccupés, je comprends pourquoi, parce que le résultat des élections va impacter les Canadiens, nos travail, les travails au Canada, les emplois et aussi notre économie. Donc, n'importe c'est quoi les résultats, je veux vous dire, pour les gens qui sont préoccupés, je suis ici pour défendre les intérêts des Canadiens. Il y a des enjeux non résolus qui continuent d'impacter les Canadiens, donc on doit régler ces enjeux. On doit toujours prioriser les travails au Canada et les Canadiens. Et je suis là pour faire ça. En terminant, je veux toucher seulement la dernière chose, c'est finalement le fait que les libéraux ont annoncé le plan pour plafonner les émissions. C'est exactement ce que j'ai voulu dire quand j'ai parlé du fait que les libéraux veulent toujours délayer les actions contre la crise climatique et les conservateurs renient les impacts de crise climatique. Et on voit les résultats, un grand délai. Et maintenant, finalement, on a un plan. Si Justin Trudeau on veut honnêtement faire quelque chose, régler les problèmes dans ce plan et mettre en œuvre ce plan rapidement. Merci.
Combien rapidement exactement vous auriez voulu un plafond dès cette année? Combien rapidement?
Donc, on veut voir un plan qui est sans des loopholes. Et le grand problème dans ce plan, ce qu'on a vu, c'est qu'il y a des exemptions qui, en effet, créent un plan qui ne va pas vraiment fonctionner. Et le deuxième enjeu, c'est le délai. Maintenant, c'est presque 10 ans. Et c'est finalement maintenant qu'il va présenter un plan. Donc, les exemptions et les délais sont nos grands problèmes.
Yesterday's clashes at the Hindu temple in Brampton, Liberal MP Chandra Arya said on Twitter that Khalistani extremists have infiltrated the Canadian political apparatus and law enforcement agencies. He said they get a free pass in Canada. Prime Minister Modi weighed in, said Canada needs to uphold the law and order. Elizabeth May just said people need to leave their domestic grievances behind when they come to Canada. Can you respond to all of this?
There's a lot to respond to. First, I'll just start with just saying that the violence is just wrong. Unequivocally, the violence that we saw was absolutely wrong, particularly at places of prayer. That is just wrong. That should not be happening. People can protest, should be free to protest. It should not be happening where people are attending to pray or attending to find peace, and to have violent clashes there is just completely wrong. But I do want to take a moment to talk about Mr. Arya. This is someone who constantly repeats the lines of the Indian government. A government, mind you, that is under allegations that they've engaged in a campaign of terror impacting Canadians that involved shootings, that involved deaths, that involved threats to Canadians. So it is very problematic that an elected Canadian official is parroting the lines of a foreign government that engaged in allegations of serious violence and terror against Canadians. So he should stop. We should be putting Canadians first, putting our country first, and not parroting the lines of a foreign government. What I expect leaders to do is to bring down tensions, not escalate, and not drive divisions with conspiracy theories. What we need to see is end to the violence, and we need to see a firm stance against the Indian government. We need to be united in our condemnation of violence happening at places of prayer.
En français sur le temps plein doux. En français sur le temps plein doux, s'il vous plaît.
OK. Français et puis des autres questions. Donc, premièrement, je veux dénoncer absolument la violence qu'on a vue dans les places de prière, des endroits religieux. C'est complètement inacceptable. Les gens ont le droit de manifester. On peut manifester, mais dans une manière qui est sans violence, dans des endroits appropriés, pas dans les endroits religieux. Ça, c'est inacceptable. Mais je veux aussi toucher les propos de M. Arya. C'est un député ici au Canada qui répète les lignes d'un gouvernement étranger, un gouvernement de l'Inde, qui a des allégations qu'ils ont géré une campagne de violence, de terrorisme, effectivement, contre les Canadiens, selon la GRC. Donc, on doit dénoncer les propos d'un député qui répète les lignes d'un gouvernement accuser de ces allégations. Ça, c'est inacceptable. Il doit arrêter. On doit avoir un front uni. On doit être unis contre des gouvernements étrangers qui veulent gérer des campagnes de violence contre les Canadiens. Ça doit être notre position.
Cap, and how would you like to see that policy be strengthened?
Yeah, one of the loopholes, for example, is for refinement, there's no cap on pollution. So if you're refining, there's literally no cap. You can pollute as much as you want. That's one concrete example that really makes the plan not really a strong plan to tackle emissions and pollution.
Pour les élections aux États-Unis demain.
Prime Minister, Mr. Delay, because this has taken 9 years to get this cap out there, you're now asking for more changes and tightening of this regulation, which could be perceived as a further delay. So is it not better to get this out there than wait and finesse it more?
Well, there's just a couple of very obvious loopholes that need to be closed, but let's get it done quickly. Absolutely. There's been 9 years of delay. Finally, there's something put forward with some serious loopholes. Fix those loopholes quickly and get it done right away.
Will you keep the government, you'll prop up the government until that's done?
We've said that we'll look at any vote before the House and make a decision that's in the best interest of Canadians. At a time when people are struggling and people are hurting, we want to see actions. Thanks so much. Merci. Merci.